Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, everyone who's joining this Wellbeing of Women webinar, which is the second in our 2024 series. And this webinar is actually really focused on the importance of promoting women's health at work. Now, as everybody who's joined this platform today will be painfully aware, women make up nearly half of the UK workforce, but many of them feel forced to reduce their hours at work or pass up promotions, even quit their jobs due to lack of support. So when organisations support women's health, we know that it's economically important for them because this enables women to thrive at the workplace, and that always benefits businesses and the economy and wider society. So as one of my mantras has always been, when we get it better for women, we get it better for everyone in society, because quite simply, everyone benefits. And I would also argue we get it better for less money because we waste less resources when we get women to thrive and reach their potential. So we're going to explore how women can advocate for themselves at work if they're not currently receiving the support that they need to optimally function, and how organisations can build a culture of support and a positive impact on their workforce. So my name's Lesley Regan. I'm still practicing as a gynaecologist at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington, and I'm the chair of Wellbeing of Women, and I'm also currently the Women's Health Ambassador for England. So I'm wearing lots of different hats, but I'm not going to be talking. I'm going to now introduce you to my wonderful panel. We've got firstly Dr Krystal Wilkinson, and Krystal is an associate professor in human resource management, and she's based at Manchester Metropolitan University in the Business School Centre for, and I love this title, Decent Work and Productivity. And she's done an enormous amount of research, but she's focused on the work-life interface, women's health and well-being at work. And the list of her current research projects is very, very lengthy. So I'm not going to take up lots of time telling you all about them, but just read her bio, which has been sent to all of the participants online. She really has got a fantastic range of understanding about women's health right across their life course. And I think that's so important. She's published prolifically, and she features in many media outlets. And she has all sorts of other strings to her bow, but that's not the topic of today. So I'm going to move on, and I'm going to introduce our second panelist, who is Amy McEwen. And Amy is an award-winning mental health and well-being consultant, and she's got 20 years of experience that she's now going to share with us. And she coaches organisations of varieties of different sizes and putting into place evidence-based and measurable, and most importantly, sustainable strategies, which are innovative because they're effective. And I think the sustainability is the thing that we're all interested in women, I mean, as women, because I think the thing about women is that they're there for the long game. And if we don't make things sustainable, we're just a fizz that goes out straight away. We've wasted our time and energy. So I'm really thrilled that she's joined me, and she's going to be talking about some of the work she's done for EY, one of the big four accountancy firms. I think she wrote and implemented their mental health and wellbeing strategy, and all sorts of other things that she's been up to. As I say, I'm not going to spend more time talking about that. And I'm going to move on to our third panelist, who I'm going to ask to set off or talk to first, and that's Laura Chin-See. And Laura was diagnosed with endometriosis and fibroids back in 2014. And what I'm most importantly hoping that she's going to focus on is that until that time, when she had her diagnosis some 10 years ago, she was under the impression that having heavy, painful periods was normal. And that very much resonates with my belief and our charity, Wellbeing of Women's current campaign, which is called Just a Period, because what we want to focus on is that it's not just a period. And if the periods are so heavy or so painful or so irregular or so problematic that women can't go to school or college or work or carry on with their caring responsibilities, then that is not normal and they need help. And so our role is to ensure that they get access to help which can resolve those problems as swiftly as possible. And then Laura has had multiple surgeries, and I don't want to preempt her because I think she's going to tell us our story. But she was then forced to leave her job last year, a job that she loved, because of her menstrual health. So I think you'll immediately be able to see in the audience why I think it's so important that we hear from her today, and because she wants to speak out, because she believes that workplaces should be much more open and respectful of women's health. And I would be letting WOW down if I didn't come up with my usual comment, was there is nothing that happens to human beings more commonly in the healthcare space than having a menstrual period. So 51% of the population have 12 periods a year for nearly 40 years of their lives. So this has got to be something that we really focus on. And my ultimate aim as chair of Wellbeing of Women, the thing I want to deliver before I retire, is the fact that any time a girl or woman goes to a healthcare professional, that asking about her period health is going to be a routine part of the consultation, in the same way as that if you came to see me as a gynecologist, and I didn't ask you about what operations you'd had and what allergies you had and what drugs you were taking, you would think I was not really doing the job properly. So that's what I'm hoping in the long-term aim. So Laura, can I turn to you now? And I think you're very generously going to share with us and with all the attendees on the platform, and there's 212 already, and the numbers are going up, your journey. So the floor is yours, or the Zoom is yours, and we are so grateful to you for coming to share with us your story. Thank you.
Of course. Hi, so thank you again so much for inviting me to share my story. So when I first started having my period at the age of 11, they were heavy and traumatic. I had no idea how to deal with them. I would bleed through my clothing, I was vomiting, I had severe stomach and back pain, I was just miserable. Eventually, my mum ended up taking me to see our GP, and I was prescribed the combined hormonal contraceptive pill called Loestrin, which helped with the pain. If we fast forward to 2012, my husband and I wanted to start a family. So I stopped taking the pill thinking it would be easy. But unfortunately, my period returned with a vengeance. I was eventually diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis, fibroids, and adenomyosis. So far to date, I've had 10 surgeries and 4 failed rounds of IVF. Over the last 7 years, I've been working as a business analyst, and this has been a role that I've loved. Unfortunately, if I was in the office on my period, I would have to wear 2 pairs of period pants, incontinence pads, and at least 3 sanitary towels, because I was constantly rushing to the toilet, fearing that I was leaking. I've been unable to use tampons because they're just too painful for me. Severe pain and occasionally migraines would start several days before the bleeding, and pain relief would just leave me feeling drowsy. I was eventually allowed a reasonable adjustment, which meant that I could work from home during my period. But sometimes I would just be too poorly to work. I even tried lying on my bed with my laptop just for comfort, but sometimes I had no choice but to call in sick. I can recall one day being in the office on my period, and I was just counting down the hours to when I could go home, because I was experiencing excruciating pain in my uterus. I was too afraid to ask if I could leave early because I didn't want to be off sick. Unfortunately, last year I went over the sickness absence limit, which meant that I had more than 6 absences in a 12-month period. All of my absences were related to my period problems, but I was treated in the same way as someone who, for example, had a cold on one occasion and then a different illness on another occasion. I ended up joining a union for support because instead of being allowed to continue with my work, I was constantly being pulled into disciplinary meetings with my union rep. I did ask for the sickness absence policy to be updated to take into account those employees who have chronic illnesses, but I was told that there are just too many illnesses to add. It did feel as though my employer didn't believe that I was ill, and this was despite my GP writing a supporting letter confirming my conditions. Sometimes I ended up using my annual leave when I was too ill to work, because at least this wouldn't count towards the number of sickness absences. It was bad enough trying to cope with the pain of my period, but I also felt pressure to work when I was too poorly, and I was spending a lot of time preparing for my disciplinary and appeal meetings. It took a massive toll on my mental health, and I felt bullied, and unfortunately I became suicidal. On overhearing yet another tearful work call, my husband told me that I needed to hand my notice in because it was just having too much of a toxic effect on my mental health. I did ask HR if I could have a private conversation with them, but they told me they'd already done everything they could in line with the sickness policy. And they told me that if I wanted to leave, I should leave. So therefore I gave in and I resigned, as I just had no more energy to fight. It was a really tough decision to give up a full-time job and a full salary, but I felt like I had no choice. I had to put my health first. My confidence has been knocked along with my mental health, and I'm still anxious about moving to another role in case I'm treated in the same way. But I, of course, understand that businesses need to run, but I'm sure there's a better way to deal with those employees who have chronic health conditions instead of treating them the same as those who don't have these conditions. I'm just hoping that my story will inspire some change and that we can start a conversation. Thank you. Thank you again for listening.
Laura, I feel we should clap you. There's so many lovely complimentary and supportive comments in the chat, which you'll be able to look at now that you can concentrate on that. And so many people have said how brave you are and how much they appreciate you sharing this story. It is really, really, really tragic, isn't it?
It is, yes.
One of the things that I think we've managed to achieve at the Department of Health now in the Women's Health Strategy team is that we no longer talk about benign gynecological problems. We only talk about cancerous ones and chronic disabling ones. So I think it's really important to understand that even if it's not something that's going to kill you, i.e. it's not a tumour or a cancer, that it can be very, very disabling. And these are problems, as I said, go on for years and years and years. You've had this problem for over 10 years and sadly have had to leave your place of work, a job that you really loved and enjoyed. So there's an enormous amount of empathy and concern about the fact that you've been exposed to this. So I think that you've portrayed your story incredibly well, and thank you very much indeed. Now I'm going to give you a few moments to take your breath and to perhaps look at some of the lovely comments in the chat. And I'm going to then move on to Krystal, Dr. Krystal Wilkinson, to give us a brief overview of her work. And I think she's going to be giving us some general insights and then possibly help us by pointing us towards some of the positive experiences of support that her workplace gave her when she had an individual problem. And I think I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'm going to leave you to tell us about that, Krystal. Thank you. And I'm just going to mute myself now because I'm at the hospital and I don't want you to all be troubled by the ambulances screaming down the road. So I will come back.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Lesley kindly kind of introduced, I used to be a HR professional before moving into academia, and now my research is all on wellbeing at work and women's health in particular at the moment. So I've done projects that span menstrual health, fertility issues, fertility tests and treatment, pregnancy loss, menopause, transition and maternity. and particularly perinatal mental illness, which is mental illness in pregnancy and post-birth. And that's what I'll come and talk to on at the end about my own lived experience. But with most of the projects I've done, most of the focus has been on lived experience. So sadly, Laura's story resonated so much with what I've heard, people talking about in different projects on different issues. And some of those themes that come through time and time again are, the individualized nature of each person's journey, but a workplace that has absolutely no narrative often to connect to. So, there's absences in your policies and the provisions that meet those individual requirements. So we're moving in the right direction. I think the menopause revolution has been fantastic in terms of getting women's health on the agenda and having a policy. But that's not necessarily filtering through as much. And you find CIPD research will support that menstrual health is a lot. So that's the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. It's the professional body for HR. There's much less organisational interest in menstruation and menstrual health, fertility issues, pregnancy loss. It's lower down the agenda. And in our research as well, we found a lot of kind of absent narratives even within those policies. So people talk about, well, queer experience maybe is not reflected, or Black women's experiences is not reflected. Different cultural issues. People who've got a disability, an underlying disability as well. The mental health challenges that come with a lot of what people can see as a physical thing are not talked about as much. There's less support. A lot of issues with the medical system, unfortunately. So, Laura had a horrific experience there when she had a diagnosis and she was going to work to say, look, I've got doctor's notes. But there's a lot of people who have 8 years before they can get a diagnosis. There's misdiagnosis around perimenopause and things like that. So people can't even, or don't feel that they can start that conversation in the workplace because, well, I haven't got I don't know what it is, or I can't prove it. A lot of cultures around anything around menstrual health, menopause, just being trivialized, be seen as it's just a period, exactly, just a period. So some people will have had senior staff maybe that they didn't suffer or didn't struggle with pregnancy or maternity or menopause, so they don't think it's an issue. We've done research in the NHS where there are workforce pressures, people thinking that we're so understaffed, we're so I don't want to drop my colleagues in it, it's just a period. And it's kind of like this idea that it's not as legitimate as other illnesses or other reasons for not being in work. So there's a lot of these kind of themes around silence, people not being able to talk about things, stigma, felt stigma, taboo, and outright discrimination. There really is across various different medical conditions that we've seen in our research. So there's the kind of the lived experience strand, and sadly at the moment, time and time again, it seems to be just down to good luck of having a good manager in terms of whether you get support or not. That's the kind of seems to be the central thing is do I feel like enough trust to tell my manager, and then are they going to react appropriately? So that's kind of one strand, and the other strand is really around kind of partnership, working with organisations and trying to hear from other stakeholders as well. So we've done research with an NHS trust, the Northern Care Alliance, and I think there's going to be a link posted to the partnership work that we did there, where we did surveys of all staff, but we also did a survey of line managers on what were their challenges around providing support. And there was stuff coming through there around people not having time to give to this issue, not having training, not feeling confident, not knowing sort of how much autonomy they have in terms of what adjustments they can offer. So and also some of the challenges for HR and for other organisations when they are trying to push through change. So I think that's kind of a summary from the research side. Do you want me to go on to talk about my experience a little bit? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, please, if you would share that, because I think everyone would find that very helpful as well. And then I'll ask Amy to help us with some constructive suggestions for how we can be supportive if we're employers, and how as employees we can best encourage that positive response to our needs. So Krystal, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so just a little bit of background then, is I have struggled with my mental health on numerous occasions, and so it was a pre-existing condition, I guess, that my employer knew about. The extent to which that has informed, the way that my trajectory went, I don't know, but I didn't have any qualms about raising the fact that I was struggling when I was. But I very much anticipated struggling in the postnatal period. In terms of postnatal depression, I was expecting postnatal depression. I had had a prior mental health diagnosis. My mother had been extremely poorly on both instances when she gave birth. She was hospitalised. I'd seen a perinatal psychiatrist in the planning of the pregnancy. So very much thinking, I have a plan, I'm prepared, I'm expecting to be very poorly. I had a textbook perfect pregnancy, textbook perfect birth, textbook perfect first 3 weeks. I felt a bond. I was very, very loved up with my baby, with my little family bubble. Then my husband went back to work at the end of his paternity leave, and everything just fell apart. So in terms of anxiety, just feeling completely unable to cope. Things quickly spiraled, and I was admitted to a mother and baby unit. Things kept spiraling. I was expecting that would sort everything out, and it really didn't. Things got worse and worse and worse. I was separated from a little boy. Little boy was sent home to dad, and I was put onto sort of general psychiatry, or adult mental health facility for quite some time. And it was, it was absolutely devastating. I 100% thought I'd lost everything. I was suicidal. I thought there's no way I'm ever going to be able to be a mum. There's no way I'm ever going to be allowed back to work. There's no way. I genuinely thought everything was over. But the approach to maternity management that my employer took, and again, I'm not going to know how much is policy and how much is just the very kind individuals, was that people reached out to me, people contacted me, how are you doing while you're on the maternity leave? That gave me the opportunity to say, that I was struggling with trusted people. And then there was a really effective plan put in place. So I had frequent contacts during that maternity leave, but on my terms, when I felt comfortable with contact. I went in with my community mental health practitioner for a meeting before return to work to plan what that return to work would look like. It was completely led by me in terms of what do you think would help you? And that's how it was phrased. What do you think will help you? It wasn't, which bits of the job even. It was what do you think would help you? And it was discussion. It was all very much different elements of my job. And for me, I didn't know. And I've had this before when I've had mental health struggles. I don't know. I just feel I can't do anything. I don't know. So it was very much, well, let's try this and then we'll revisit, and we'll try that and we'll revisit. And there was discussion as well about colleagues and about the effect of other people. So, if you're going to share an office with people, how might that be? If you're going to be teaching, how might that be? And consideration. But it's very much what's shown in our research of it needs to be an individualized based approach. Recognize that people don't always know what they're going to need. So revisit. Give somebody a say in it. It isn't rather than something just being done to people. And it really was care. It was care from specific individuals that reached out, and that kind of made sure that things were going to be done sensitively, I guess, and appropriately. So I went back to work before I felt at all ready. I wasn't ready to go back to work, really. I wasn't ready to be a mum. It was before I'd been sort of really on my own with my child as a parent, but it started to build a sense of capability as a person again. And I genuinely do think that that's been part of my recovery, a huge part of my recovery, because I was suicidal, and I thought if I'd have lost any one big part of my identity in that period, that would have pushed me over the edge, So it's kind of it was that I've done research on perinatal mental health in police officers, and it comes up time and time again, this loss of identity, loss of sense of control. And so having something where your employer is helping you get back to a sense of who you were before you were a parent, I don't think we can underestimate that. And I think it's a massive, massive missed opportunity at the moment that perinatal mental health is on very, very few organisations' agendas. It's not in that narrative as much as menopause. Yeah, it's great that we've got menopause now. Maternity has been for a long time. But like menstrual health is only just getting on now. I'd love to see maternal mental health and perinatal mental health, because 1 in 5 women experience mental illness in pregnancy and post-birth, but so do 1 in 10 men. And I know this is well-being of women, so I'm not going to go on to that too much, but I think it's something we just need to be talking about more.
Thank you very much indeed, Krystal, and thank you for your honesty, which again, the platform and our participants are really very appreciative of. So let me turn now to Amy McEwen and ask Amy for her to think about the importance of developing an approach to being supportive in the workplace. How do we instill that sort of culture, that different way of thinking? How do we make Krystal's employer's response the norm, as opposed to what we painfully see, and that's Laura's response, Laura's employer's rather response to her problem, which not only was you know, a very severe one, but one that went on for a very, very long time, and which she fought very admirably. So what do you think? And I mean, it's a rather difficult question to be asking an individual just like this on a platform, but I suppose we need the shortcut to success here. What's the answer for employers? How can they going to develop a positive culture?
Yeah, so thank you. And I think you've just summarised it there. There are two very, very different organisational responses. And that is the key here. It's how your organisation responds. And I think the number you said at the beginning, you know, 51% of the world is women. And actually, if you look at the absence statistics that are being floated around all the political parties at the moment, a lot of people out of work are older women sat on NHS waiting lists. So we need to crack women at work throughout their life cycle. And we need to do that by looking at an organisational response. So my background is 20 years of putting in health and mental health strategies across organisations, more recently as a consultant. And I was always very interested in looking at the demographics of which organisation that I'm putting in. So, for example, when I worked with the FTSE 100, I realised most of the people that we were working with were women. They were predominantly a female retail organisation. So when we're designing strategies, and I work long-term and sustainably, I'm not a big fan on, you know, this week it's menopause month and next week we'll do that. It's how we build in systems and processes and policies across an organisation to slowly educate and change culture such that the response we got from Krystal's employer is no more the norm. And my first thing I love to do, and I think is the most useful thing to do, is talk to women. Talk to women about what their experience in that organisation is, because some of the most progressive organisations with the smallest gender pay gaps, if you actually speak to the women in that organisation, are not actually looking after them in a way that they could. So I'm a big fan of going in, understanding what's there, and actually speaking to women about what their experience is in that workplace. And then most strategies end up having prevention, education, awareness, so how we teach people to look after themselves, how we make good manager responses, how do we ensure that people are talking about these things, get over the stigma through programs, celebrating awareness days, but that education piece. What we do when we start to see things go wrong, and what we do if there is illness and absence, and then the reasonable adjustment. And then it's the layers within that. Now, what I thought was very interesting about both the stories we shared, and I mean, I also share lived experience of I was made redundant after a very lengthy and traumatic miscarriage. So I was off work for 2.5 months and then lost my job 2 weeks later. So my experience is slightly different. But where this comes down to is policies a lot of the time. So once we've figured out our approach, it's how we weave women's health and mental health through all of our touch points with an organisation, but with policies. So we're seeing the rise of menstruation policies and pregnancy loss policies and menopause policies. But I think the example that Laura talked about is one I see time and time again, where women are being discriminated by existing HR policies. So yes, we do our education, and yes, we bring in policies for things that are specific women's health issues, but it's looking back through policies we have. So the example that Laura gave about sickness absence was because she had a chronic health issue, and that actually she'd come off the contraceptive pill to try and get pregnant. You know, I've managed people who've got chronic illness, which is a disability under the Act. One of the ladies I managed had bipolar, and she came off her drugs to try and get pregnant, kept going off sick for extended periods of time because coming off the drugs for pregnancy meant that she was unwell. She then tapped into that sickness absence kind of policy. So she stopped getting discretionary sick pay. And she then managed to get pregnant, but because she'd already hit the threshold for sick pay, she then didn't get any statutory maternity pay. So it's one thing looking at educating and how we train our managers and how we talk about these things and how we put the right policies in. But it's then looking back at our culture and existing practices and the policies that are in place and looking at where they discriminate. And I use the word discriminate because for women it often is, because we have higher rates of chronic illness, higher rates of mental illness and different illnesses. How are we already discriminating against women with the policies we have, and how do we change those?
Thank you, Amy. Really important. And as you say, policies are really important. And that's one of the reasons why I'm involved as an ambassador, because changing policy is the first step to implementing change, isn't it? I was going to ask a few questions as well. And I hope that Lena and the WOW team will let me know if there are any specific questions from the audience, because I haven't got the questions. I've got the comments in the chat, but I haven't got any specific questions yet. But I've got plenty of my own, so please don't worry. I was interested to flag up the point that Krystal made, and that is that mental health problems, which still remain taboo. I think many of us in the health service still pay lip service to, parity of esteem to both physical and mental health disorders. We don't really have parity of esteem, and there is still great stigma attached. But I think what you were emphasizing to us so clearly, Krystal, was that actually not only can this run in families, there can often be a family history which can be indicative of possibly a potential risk, but also that a previous mental health disorder places you at much greater risk when you're pregnant and particularly in the postnatal period. And I think one of the things that you emphasized as well, or you drew out, was that, although you were very happy in your bubble, and I'm sure lots of people were saying, oh, well, you just had a wonderful baby, you should be so happy, etc., etc. And so many women I see are feeling so guilty about the fact that they have postnatal depression or they're not feeling right. And I think that we don't respond to that in the appropriate ways, I think, both as healthcare professionals and as members of the public and as family colleagues and things. So I'm very interested in either yours or Amy's thoughts about how we can do better with that, and also to emphasize to everybody on the platform today that when you have an episode of postnatal depression, it is highly, highly likely that you're going to need mental health services later in life. It's also very common when women have had things like high blood pressure or gestational diabetes that they're going to have diabetes by the time that they're 50 usually, and they're going to have more problems with cardiovascular disease later in life. And yet we get to the end of the pregnancy having collected an enormous amount of information about that pregnancy and that baby in utero, and then we do nothing with it. So I'd be interested in Amy's thoughts and possibly Krystal chipping in, and please, Laura, you chip in too if you'd like to, as to how we get people to understand that maternity is just an episode in the woman's life course. And if we're going to use the information that we gain from her response to being pregnant, we would be so much better equipped to look after them later, and that her pre-pregnancy state of health and mental health is really going to be important in determining the outcome of that pregnancy and later life. So I don't know who wants to go first. Amy, I think you've unmuted yourself, so crack on.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. It's really interesting you say that, because we've talked about the rise of menopause and menstruation. And, I've been teaching women about the menstrual cycle for 20 years as a sort of passion project outside. It's really, and in workplaces, it's interesting to see how women's health has hit organizations. I think it started with menopause for a number of reasons. The first being menopause affects all women, so it gets over the kind of fertility hump and people who don't want to become mothers. There's no blood involved, but also it's led by senior leaders and senior women. So menopause kind of started, and now menstruation. When I do talks, and in fact, I'm doing one for the EU Parliament tomorrow on women's health, I use the McKinsey definition, and one that came out so strongly in your women's health strategy, Lesley, about cradle to grave. Because the danger of talking about menopause and the danger of talking about menstruation is we forget that actually women's health through a life cycle actually is all interlinked and is sort of related. So I think it's about looking at women's health through the spectrum. And when I work with organizations, I look at what touch points we have with an individual employee throughout a year, and what touch points do we have with an individual employee throughout their career. And I think looking at women's health in that way, and what we need and what support, and how to link it, and how to get good use of knowledge and data is important. I'm also a big fan of occupational health and care pathways, and a lot of work I do with organisations is making sure they've got the right health providers in, and we've got the right care pathways and roles and responsibilities. And for women's health, that means two things. Firstly, ensuring that the health providers that we've procured really understand women's health issues and have the right support for women and understand our culture. But secondly, when I was at Ernst & Young, that was an example you gave, I used to get my health providers in the same room once a quarter, and we'd look at what numbers for people were using, where people were falling off the care pathways, but we encouraged them to work together so that actually data was shared across different providers, so that we're then using the knowledge we've got earlier in order to kind of look at things later. So I think it's about that, thinking it through, not just discrete things like menstruation, fertility and menopause, but how we approach women's health and educate and build pathways and policies, processes around that. Does that answer the question?
I think it does answer it incredibly well. And I thought I'd give everybody a little bit of background, if I may, as well. So I quite agree with you that menopause is the wrong end of the life course to be starting. But I think it's quite interesting to understand what the trigger was about menopause. And the trigger was that there became a business and an economic reason that was understood by policymakers that we were losing so many women between the ages of 45 and 65. And the reality is, of course, that you can't replace their skill set and their mentoring capacity. And I would argue as well, their role model abilities as well. So it's very difficult as a younger woman in the workplace to aspire to a 60-year-old if there aren't any 60-year-olds in the workplace with you, because they've all quit because they feel unsupported. So it was that partly that. So there was a business case that the people started to understand. And so I suppose it comes down to Treasury priorities. And secondly, that we got a couple of very charismatic celebrities to front up programs and documentaries. Happily, I can tell you that almost all of those celebrities are ambassadors for Wellbeing of Women, which is not a coincidence, I can assure you, but I think that's really important. But what I've often said in the last couple of years since working on the Women's Health Strategy is that I want to make sure that menstruation and all the other things that happen in the reproductive years or in earlier life are talked about in exactly that same way. And my personal view is that if we get menstruation and menstrual health understood in teenagers at school, then it will become very evident that fertility has a limit, that you're not fertile for the whole of your life as a woman. And that also there is an inevitability about becoming menopausal. So I completely agree, Amy, it's gone the wrong way round, but we've got to work with what we've got. So I'm hoping that we can really ensure that just a period is going to become as, if you like, exciting and charismatic as menopause has been. And certainly we're getting a very positive response from employers at the moment about that. So I really thank you for your comments. Laura, would you like to add anything here? Because you're smiling and nodding at me, which is always very encouraging when you're chairing things and you've got a lot of people you can't see on the platform. So would you have some thoughts about this?
I was just going to agree with what you said about, we need to start educating young people more about so their menstrual health through to fertility and then through to menopause. Because when I was at school, we just had like a very basic education, and then you're like handed some tampons and a leaflet. So yeah, I'm quite interested in the Just a Period campaign as well.
Yes, good. Well, please come and participate in the Wellbeing of Women website and get involved in that campaign. There's all sorts of fabulous resources. We can send you a copy of our promotional campaign film, which was undertaken or put together by some very talented videographers and some of our wonderful supporters who've shared their thoughts with us. And I would also say that Janet Lindsay, the Chief Executive of Wellbeing of Women, and I have been going to some schools and running menstrual health workshops, interactive workshops. And we have developed, or not, we know we've been lucky enough for some of the girls and boys who've attended those workshops to actually get to trust us after an hour or so, and to start to share with us insights and fears and misconceptions that they've had about menstrual health, and told us very much so how they really believe that they need to be taught a lot more in school, and that they also need to be taught together so that they can get rid of the shame and the stigma and the taboo bit, that if they're taught separately, that it can be very difficult. So I understand that there are quite a lot of single-sex schools, but what we managed to do in one single-sex girls' school was to run a workshop and then invite the local boys' school to come and join us for a myth-busting session. And it was really very, very enthusiastically received. And they all said how much better it would be if they were taught together. And so that's the younger people telling us what they would like to hear about. And I think we must respond to that. And if we're going to, tackle the disparities, the racial disparities and the marginalization of some groups of women, we've got to find out what it is that they want, not keep telling them what we think it is that they need. So, Krystal, have you got some other thoughts? Because you've got a wealth of experience, and I think quite a few people have been asking for links to your research as well. So you've certainly inspired and curiosity and interest there. Have you got thoughts about what else that we should be doing to enlighten employers? Because not everyone can say that they had the positive experience that you were fortunate to have.
Yeah, I mean, so there's some, I'll send on links after some published work, and some of the kind of resources we've done in partnership with like charities and professional bodies and stuff that might be of use. But yeah, I mean, I think from what our research is, there's a lot of stuff that is it's not specific women's health issue specific. There's a lot of the things that will be just beneficial across all of the different conditions. And I mean, some of the low cost, easy stuff that organisations can do is just put these issues on the agenda somewhere, just start a narrative. Whether that be celebrating Awareness Week, I know you're not keen, Amy, but it gets a topic somewhere talked about. Having a blog or some basic information and signposting to the specific charities. They can do that very low cost. Just have it somewhere so that if somebody types in IVF, or they type in postnatal depression, or they type in perimenopause, that on the staff intranet, something pops up. Or if it's on posters and things around the building. So just to start, this is something that we can talk about in this business. And then line manager, whether it be training or guidance or toolkits or something, you don't necessarily have to have a policy on everything, but just getting these topics onto the line manager's radars so that, again, they know where to go in the moment should somebody need support. So they don't have to be an expert on every single type of fertility treatment or because there's loads of different perinatal mental health diagnoses, for example, but where do they go to get more information when they need it? But with general principles around just kind of kindness, and I call it temporary reasonable adjustments in our fertility treatment research, because that comes from the disability in the Equality Act, this reasonable adjustment. But for sometimes it might be temporary. If it's the fertility treatment cycle, you might need some adjustments to where you work or the hours of work or the jobs that you do for a limited period of time. If we have this kind of, what sort of flexibility could we maybe give this person that will mean that they can keep working, because not everybody's going to need a lot of leave for these issues. So about kind of dialogue, flexibility where we can, awareness raising, and then for the bigger organisations, they can make it more formal with the policies and the procedures.
Yes. Now, there are a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, and one is, and I think it's a very important thing, and I'm going to ask Amy if she'd like to make some comments about it. And there's somebody very sensibly raising the concern that if you're a small business and you're dependent on your workforce being present, then how are we going to prevent employers avoiding employing women if they think that they've got to be, or if they think that it's important that they have work, they have menstrual and menopause appropriate flexibility? How are we going to sort of, if you like, score an own goal?
So this is a really interesting question, and it's one I've had a number of conversations with people about. How I try to frame when I'm talking about women's health is how awesome women's bodies are. Like, they're these amazingly incredible bodies that work in a cyclical way in a kind of linear workforce. Because I want to get away from the fact that while some people might need, and you said it yourself, Krystal, some people might need some time off. Putting in a menstruation or menopause policy doesn't mean that actually everybody's going to need lots of time off, and we've got yet another reason to not employ women. So I think that's firstly the narrative as to how we frame the discussion around women's health. Secondly, your point, Lesley, about menopause. We're losing vast numbers of talented, highly intelligent, skilled, experienced workers. So all of this, to me, comes down to really good management practices. And actually I work a lot in mental health as well. It's a similar thing. Like, a good manager and a good culture is getting the best out of your people, and that means flexing occasionally to support them. You're going to get a better outcome in the long term in terms of engagement, productivity, loyalty, but also not losing talent in a situation, in an economy where talent is hard to get. So it's how we frame it. This isn't that women need special treatment. It's actually flex the workforce that was designed predominantly for men in the Industrial Revolution to bring out the best of women and what they can actually do.
I couldn't agree with you more. Laura, you're again smiling there. Do you want to make a comment about that? Not that women need special treatment. I think that's really important. And I have been known as in recent weeks to be making comments like, well, I think the NHS was designed for men by men. And you've just pointed out about how the workforce was designed. Currently, our work practices are designed, as you said, by the Industrial Revolution, which is some 100 years ago, or several hundred years ago now. So Laura, any comments from you as somebody who was forced to give up work and had an opposite experience for your long-term problem, an opposite experience to the one that Krystal had?
Yeah, so I agree with Amy. It's not about like women having special treatment. It's about having inclusive policies, but also going back to what Krystal said as well, it should be quite easy for an organization to maybe provide information, say, on their intranet about various health issues that just to make people feel supported. Yeah.
Thank you. And one of the things that came out at one of the period workshops that I was telling you about is we took our patron with us, the Duchess of Edinburgh, and she famously said, and of course all the tabloids picked this up, we need to take the period products out of the shelf and put them on the table. And there was a lovely picture of her with brightly coloured products, because there's somebody in the chat talking about how they still feel embarrassed when they're at work taking a brightly coloured tampon packet or pad packet with them, trying to find the loo quickly. So there's still a lot of work to be done with this. And I think as well, a lot of people talking about talent retention and how extremely important it is and cost effective for every business, and how we've really got to work hard on changing this mindset. So I think that I can probably say that everybody here today has making a contribution to changing that mindset, including the men who have joined us on this call or on this platform and are saying that they're finding it interesting too. So just coming back to Krystal, is there anything further you'd like to add before we wind up? And if there are anybody else who would like me to raise their particular question, please put it again in the chat if you've already sent it to me. There's an enormous number of comments coming through the chat, so please forgive me if I've missed out, but if you want to flag up again, I'll do my best to answer it in the last 6 or 7 minutes that we've got before I have to close the webinar. And thank you to those people who have said, yes, we agree that women are awesome. I agree with you too. I think they're absolutely extraordinary and so adaptable and so flexible in the things that they can achieve. And the world's a better place because of them. So Krystal, a few comments, and then we'll just see people if anybody else wants to put anything in as questions.
Just really resonate with what you said before about kind of the pathways of experience. And I think we've got pathways of experience in terms of our bodies, and our health experiences. And we know that, if you've got menstrual health issue like endometriosis, you might struggle more on your fertility journey. If you struggle on your fertility journey, you might struggle more if you do get pregnant and have a baby, with kind of the anxiety around that. And people with postnatal mental health issues might struggle in menopause. So kind of thinking of that, but also that pathway of experience in the workplace and in employment in general, in that if you disclose something and you're treated shockingly like Laura, you know, you're probably going to be a bit more wary, with more one defences up to approach this next time, and then that shuts down any opportunity of getting support. You know, so it's kind of like employers trying to be aware, line managers trying to be aware of, you know, do we know, can we get a little bit of information about people's histories, and how as a culture can we encourage disclosure, and discourage where there are instances of discrimination or bad practice, for there to be consequences for those people, so that it doesn't perpetuate. Because, you know, other people say, you know, if somebody in my department has had a really shocking maternity discrimination experience, you know, I'm not going to, you know, I'm going to be really wary about saying I'm struggling. So kind of just trying to think around those life courses and pathways.
Yeah, and as somebody on the one of our participants in the audience says, as an ex-teacher, I remember teaching a puberty lesson in single-sex groups, but was surprised when the tough streetwise 10-year-old boys wanted to know about periods, as they'd heard whispers and wanted to understand more. And I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much for making that comment, because what I was really impressed with when I went to do these menopause health or period health workshops was the boys' comments about how they really needed to know about this, because they wanted to understand why their sister was grumpy on a regular basis, and that everyone whispered about it and they didn't understand, or also why their mum, who used to be full of fun, this, that and the other, was grumpy and losing her temper. So I think since we are half of the workforce and 51% of the population, it's absolutely crucial that we make sure that the other half of the workforce understand this. And then
can I just add on,
yeah?
sorry, on that, it's Helen Tomlinson, the menopause employment champion. She, you know, she says that she's done some men only sessions with the big businesses, and she did like 600 men on a call, and said it was great because they were having these questions, thinking about my wife, my colleagues, my daughter, my mother, you know. And it's kind of, I think it's that allyship, and that is so important.
Very important, and allyship is one of the things that I'm constantly going on about, and I'm always incredibly encouraging to the men in the NHS who want to be women's health champions when I'm trying to talk about policy implementation across the country. And another comment as well, and I think that this is probably directed at Amy, and that is from a lady who's saying that she's had a very hard time navigating her way back into the workforce after maternity. Anxiety over the baby's well-being, you know, with the childminder be there, was the nursery okay, and then being discriminated against when it came to career progression. And I mean, I see constantly people raising eyebrows, male eyebrows being raised, I should say, when women say, well, I've got to go now because I've got to pick up my child from the nursery. So how are we going to teach people about different ways to be more flexible about the responsibilities that women have and the things that they've got to be able to honour as well as contributing to the workplace? Amy, can you give us some brilliant?
Yeah, it's a really complicated one. I think what we need to understand is our current work system doesn't work for anyone right now, especially if you've got a family. So, you know, we have working hours that are between 9 and 5. Basically, work was designed for men with a partner doing all domestic and caring duties. The reality now is you need 2 people working for a reasonable standard of living, and we haven't changed our school hours. I have a child who's 10 and one who's 6. So I've had that experience of juggling, but I've also had the experience of losing my job and also returning prior to that from maternity leave. Maternity leave is a tricky one because how women are treated is totally different. I remember when I came back after having my daughter, you know, to see what everyone was watching me to see if I was still the driven, creative, focused person as I was. And when they realized I was, then it was actually I was treated normally. But there was a good few months. And my other observation about maternity leave was, whilst it was quite easy to pick up with the work, it was the politics and dynamics that took a long time to pick up because they changed so slowly. So I think there is a whole section on motherhood and how we treat it. How I manage it at a personal level is my partner, who is a partner in a big accountancy firm, and I do half the childcare each. You know, he is a proud, and you said the word ally, you know, he does half the pickups, half the drop-offs. I got so fed up with, when I was in a Big Four, you know, the men getting applauded for taking their kid to the nursery once every couple of weeks. So I think it's how we manage our families, how we manage that. And he, you know, he is a proud role model of a father that does 50% to support me do my career. The point that you raised about anxiety is an interesting one. I have never felt remotely guilty about leaving my children in nanny care at school. I love what I do. I'm an intelligent, educated, driven woman who wants to make an impact on the world. And I think actually getting out and doing it and showing people and being on webinars like this is how we change things for our daughters. But that's actually, if you frame it from that way, it's not, I'm a bad mother because I'm leaving my child at home. No, I'm a better mother because I'm actually teaching my children what it's like to be an independent woman, bringing my skills and talent and knowledge to the world and changing workplaces and the world for them. So that's really how I think about that. But, you know, it's going to take time. I think forcing people into much longer paternity leaves will help, because the challenge is that 2 weeks means that there's a system imbalance. And for me, that was exemplified when I lost my job. We were equal careers, and suddenly, you know, I had no career, he had all the power, and it's taken us a long time to do that. So we have a way to go. We have a way to go, but I think the way to do it is also allowing flexibility in the workplace, because the current system does not work for families, for men or women or children. The fact that work and school just don't sync.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Now, I'm getting your messages that I must wind this up, otherwise I get into terrible trouble. My natural enthusiasm means that we overrun. But before we leave, I want to say a very, very heartfelt thank you to my 3 panelists, who I think all of the audience would agree, if they were able to clap audibly, would be clapping very, very enthusiastically. And yes, we're getting claps all over the messages now. But the other thing I would like to emphasize is I really do want you to come and support these webinars going forward. The webinar today has been recorded and it will be distributed on YouTube tomorrow, and on our website you can access the whole library of the webinars that we've run on all sorts of aspects of women's health over the last couple of years. And I also want to emphasize to you that when we started on the menopause, if you like, let's be understanding about the menopause. We started a menopause workplace pledge, which I confess I wasn't sure that many people were going to sign up to. I was completely wrong. Thousands now of companies have signed up to this, so much so that if you go onto the Wellbeing of Women website, you'll be able to see the details about the employer membership program. You will find you're able to access the most fantastic resources so that you don't have to get a headache rethinking policies and adjustments for your own workplace, however different and varied it may be. You've got lots and lots of resources there, so please come and use them, and please make sure that you contribute to Wellbeing of Women, because I think, as you will have heard from today's webinar, and if you look at our library, we really got the backs of women and girls, and we want them to succeed, and we want them to reach their potential in whatever way they want to do it. So can I say thank you again to Laura Chinsey for being so brave as to come and talk to us today, for Amy McEwen to sharing her miscarriage, disemployment, and all of the expertise that she's learned as a consultant and as a counsellor, and to Krystal Wilkinson, thank you so much for doing the research and for sharing with us your perinatal mental health journey, which I know from the chat and from my personal experience as an obstetrician, so many women who have listened to this today will be thrilled about. And thank you lastly to the gentlemen who have been on this panel and have been brave enough to put their names up and then said thank you and talked about what they're trying to do. I'm particularly interested in the younger men who put up their ages and said, I'm championing women's health, and I hope that you realise I'm an ally. Yes, we do, and we really, really welcome you. The more men we get involved with Wellbeing of Women and the employer membership programme, the better. So with that, it's now 2:04, so I'm going to be in terrible trouble in a moment. So I'm going to thank you all again. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and make sure you tune in to the next Wellbeing of Women webinar, which I think will be held in April. Details on the website. So thank you again. Bye-bye.